today is Professor Rodney Clarken, and he's from the School of Education, Northern Michigan University. He came to China for a short visit, and we are honored to be here, able to invite him for a lecture that is doomed to be extraordinary. First, let's invite Riva to give us a brief introduction of Professor Rodney Clarken.
This morning is an ordinary morning because when this morning goes, the afternoon comes just as usual. But this morning is also a special morning because when the afternoon goes, our guest, Professor Rodney Clarken, will go. Professor Rodney, coming from School of Education, for so many years he has been the driving force behind the career of promoting and improving professional education programs throughout the university, across the nation, and even around the world. Not only that, but he is a very inspiring public speaker. So today, it's really a great opportunity for us to have such a distinguished guest. This morning, this special, ordinary morning. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Rodney Clarken.
Yeah. See you. I've had the opportunity to live in China. I lived in China from 1995 to 1996. I came with because I was a teacher, a lecturer. And I have written many stories about my living in China. And I want you to have the opportunity to read those stories, to understand my experience as an American teacher in China. To do that, I'm going to give you my business card. I understand it is polite initially to give your business card when you meet someone. I'm meeting maybe 100 people, so I brought a business card for each one of you, and I want to give that to you now. So that, for two things. One thing, my name is on it. I know my name is hard to remember because it's an American name. For Americans, Chinese names, very hard to remember. So, when I was a teacher and I would go to the schools, I didn't use my American name. I used my Chinese name. So I'm going to also teach you my Chinese name, and you can also write that down on the card. I'm not going to write it in Chinese, because one time I learned how to write my name in Chinese, but you know, you make a stroke this way. One time I made the stroke this way. The children all went, so I didn't do that anymore. I write it in English. My Chinese name is Ba. So if you can't remember mostly when I was here, and in many of my stories, you will hear people talk about Bahai, which is my Chinese name. So when I met the children, they didn't know me as Rodney Clarken because they would immediately forget. They knew me as Bahai. So you can also look for that. So I'm not going to do it formal because we don't have so much time, but I'm going to give you some cards. You pass them down, and if there's extra, pass them back. And if there's too few, come see me later, and then I will give you some extras, okay? and we will try to make sure everybody gets some. So there may be a few short, and we will make sure that you get some at the end. Here we go. I think I have some more in my bag, so if you didn't get one, see me afterwards, because I see, one second, let me go. Let's see, try this, and this. I would travel through the villages mostly in rural Sichuan, and I would give lectures. One thing I'm not sure, can you understand my English? Yes. Anyone can't understand it? Of course, you wouldn't say anything because you wouldn't understand my question. I would give lectures on teaching English as a legs. Your whole body, when you were in your mother's womb, developed. How many fingers you would have? If you didn't have 5 fingers when you were born, when you came here, you could say, oh, everybody else has 5 fingers. I want to have another finger. I only have 4 fingers. You can't do that. That world is special for developing all the capacities of your body. Now, once you get in this world, you can grow your fingers. Of course, when you have a little baby, have you ever felt you'll put your finger and they wrap their hand around it? You know, their fingers are so tiny, but still, they're all there. And it's important that they all be there, grow and be the human beings that you are today. So that all started when you were just one cell. Those 5 fingers were there. If they weren't there, then you would be in trouble. So that's, and when you are developing in your mother's womb, there is a time when you don't have fingers. There was a time when this arm is like a flipper on a fish. Now you could have said, I'm in my mother's womb, this is liquid, it's this amniotic fluid. Why would I want fingers? How can fingers help me in this world? They can't help you there. You might say, I'm just going to keep this flipper, because really a flipper works better in that world than in this world. The whole idea is you were developing not to live in that world, but really, but many of those feelings are in us immediately. When you're even with a baby who has not learned anything, has no experience, who's 1 day old, if you put that baby beside another baby or in a room where one baby is crying, those other babies hear that crying and they feel it. They feel already empathy for that other baby. And so immediately we begin loving. We immediately have the seed of love in us to care about other people. And so when the earthquake happens in Sichuan, I am sad in America. I am crying in America because I have empathy. I love those children in Sichuan. And I am feeling sad because I have that emotion, that love that has grown in me over many years, just like it is growing in you. And it helps me to know what is right and what is wrong. Also, when you are a baby, the other capacity you have is the capacity to build, to make effort, to try. This is a capacity that the Chinese people are very strong in, and the American people have not developed the same capacity as young people. So it is one of the virtues that I admire in the Chinese is the capacity to have determination, to strive, to have perseverance, to make effort, to try hard. Now, using these three capacities, you develop your mind. You develop your personality, who you are, by what you think, what you feel, and how you act. Some ways to
speech, and next we're going to have 3 presentations subsequently, and there will be no intervals for comments or questions. So all comments and questions will be reserved until after they finish their presentations. Now welcome our speakers.
My English name is Julia Zhu. I know there are so many Julias here. I'm very glad to have a brief presentation about food and in writing. I know most of us must clearly remember that when we wrote the Chinese composition of the college examination, for the sake of an average score, we strictly followed what teachers asked us to do. For example, focusing on the title and avoid challenging new or exaggerated forms, and never running the risks to have to catch the teacher's eyes. Consequently, both teachers and students are used to these tedious forms, especially when the contents are also down. But that isn't what we want. Who doesn't like the expected brand new well-resolved rewards? But you see, behind the simple story after the GCSE, I think.
So I will get rid of this. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Reva asked me to say something about content and frame, or frame of content, whatever. But Emily strongly recommended me one book, The Tipping Point. This is the book that I failed to finish reading because it's too boring for me. But I cannot find a perfect combination of content and frame till now, and I cannot find it. But I still have to say something here today. So I'd love to share something with you, something that I've learned recently about how to write a good paper. Well, the first thing I learned is from this book, The Economic Naturalist. Maybe you're quite familiar with the Chinese version. In this book, the author, Dr. Robert Frank, he is trying to explain the most fundamental principles in economics by the most common things in our daily life. Well, personally, the economics for me, I think it's a disaster. But this time it is not. Well, let's take the cost-benefit principle, for example. It is one of the most fundamental principles in the economics. The whole chapter, it only took me 5 minutes to finish reading and understanding. Even I could not give you a good definition about this principle, but I love to say that till now I have a general and basic idea about it. So I start to think, what's more is that I'd love to read more about economics. I think that's the most important thing. Well, what makes me feel good is that I love to read this kind of stuff. You know, it's economics. How can people endure this? How can I read it that long time? I can spend this time in reading it. So I started to think, what makes me feel this way? Well, you can see from here, in this chapter, the 3 highlighted words are the only words that I'm not quite familiar with. So I go to the dictionary. Well, so I can come to the conclusion that maybe it is the plain language that encourages me a lot to survive this time, to finish reading this, and even have the interest in reading more about it.
So, I am Emma. Every Tuesday we meet each other to discuss writing, and today we will talk about form and content.
Okay.
Of course, I will pay.
So slide
Actually, I really have a story about it. When I was young, I hated learning. Each time, each moment, when mom would ask me to go, I stopped writing songs. When my mom was upset, eggs contain so much nutrition. If I felt eating, I probably cannot go unhealthy. But I was so stubborn, my mom can't force me to eat it. So do you know how I want to eat them?
well, maybe you should just use.
No, eat and make eggs for me. She made this cake. Different flavors. I like this cake very much, so my mom probably will wish it. So I think content and form are just like the egg and cake in my story. Creative work can deliver our message effectively.
That sounds great. Recently, I have read some bestsellers, and I thought form plays a very important role in writing.
Can you share that with me?
As we all know, the mass media has 6 years. What's that? New, late, radical, authentic, innovative, and entertaining. As one of the typical models, bestseller in my opinion also has 6 corresponding figures. To tell the alternative truth, content stable time, useful in the life, to speak with instances, easy to understand, and open presentation. But what you may ask me, how can a book become a bestseller?
Especially if you're traveling. I used to use PowerPoint. Now I don't use PowerPoint because so many times you have a problem and you need to be prepared to do something different. And you did an excellent job to make good on how your presentation was, even though you were counting on PowerPoint, it wasn't there. You have excellent English. I'm very impressed. Well, in the countryside, I was working with teachers who taught English to the children. And I would say your English is better than those people. I think English is becoming more popular. I enjoyed the best-selling books. I read them, and it's nice to hear your impression of them. So that would be my feedback. You're doing very wonderful. I'd like to see that you have this opportunity to explore these different presentations. I would say if you do get the opportunity to go to my website, I have a page that's called the China page. On that page, I have 50 stories and essays about China. Many of them have been published. One of them that you will like, I think, particularly, was published in China Today. You know that magazine that China puts out that goes around the world? It's called China Today, and the Chinese send it all over the world. So I have 2 articles in there, and it's about, I take 3 days, it's called 3 Days in China. And what I do is I tell about when waking up the morning of the first day to when I went to bed on the 3rd day. I document what happened to me, which may sound kind of boring, but it's very interesting, especially to an American person, but even for you to see how an American person.
It seems like a student from China and those from America. And also, part of that is many of us maybe they want to go abroad to further their studies, and maybe America has put some opinion of that.
Number 1, first, I think it's very important if English is your language you're studying, that you go to a country that speaks English. As you probably know, in this world, that English is becoming the international language. I am happy about that because that is my language. Of course, there are more people in the world who speak Chinese. Many of our students are coming to China who are learning Chinese. And of course, you cannot really understand the language unless you understand the culture. So I would say that's the answer. Also, I have given you my card. If you can, we made from the United States that you don't adopt all of the things, because some of the things are not good. Many of the things are very harmful. And so you need to be careful and to use your knowing, your loving, and your willing capacity to make good decisions and not to imitate and protect yourself from those harmful influences. It is to your benefit. And so I encourage you to try to take the good, leave the bad. Even with my talk, take what is good, leave what is bad. You have a question?
I'm glad to hear that you are very sad and show your very sympathetic about earthquakes in Sichuan, and I want to know if you have done something help to and what about the Americans around you, for example,
My university has established a special fund for such fund. But really, it's hard for me to talk about it because I'm so emotional. So I'm sorry that I can't speak more about it, otherwise I become very sad. We are collecting money and sending it here, and I have collected books, English books. In fact, I had some books to go to Jujing School in the mail, in my office in the United States, and then the earthquake happened. So I pulled the books back from the mail, and when I flew over here, I brought this little suitcase, and the rest I brought were books. My suitcase, tomorrow I go to Chengdu. I expect my suitcase to be empty when I leave. I will leave everything. Other questions? I don't speak Chinese, and when I try to speak Chinese, they would always say, please, speak English. My Chinese is very bad, and but I have 4 children. All 4 of my children speak Chinese. And I have one daughter who lived in China for 5 years. And she was teaching English as a second language. She taught in Mianyang. She taught at the high school in Mianyang. So, and she taught in Chengdu. So, and I have my daughter, when she came, she was 14 years old. She went to high school, middle school in China. Even she didn't know Chinese, she went and sat every day. She would learn more Chinese. I have stories about my daughters on the website. And I had a son, Shaolai. He was 5 years old when he came. And he went to kindergarten in a Chinese kindergarten. If you go to my website, I have over 100 pictures. And you can see my son. You'll see the pictures of him in school will not be up until I go back home. But I have some pictures of him in school with his friends. And, you know, of course, when I would travel with my children around China, one time I traveled with my son, and I don't know Chinese, so I would say to my son, who's 5 years old, please ask the ladies where we should go, what we should do. And he had a Sichuan dialect. So, because he learned to speak Chinese from his learnings. He didn't learn in school. He learned from playing with, you know. I have traveled to 60 different countries. 60. I have lived in Africa. I have lived in the Caribbean. I've lived in Europe. Most of my life, before I moved to where I lived overseas. So, of course, you have culture shock. And that's mostly what my stories are about. One story that I just published the week before I came is called Assaulted in China. Do you know what assaulted means? Like somebody would have...
To China in 1994.
1995.
And before 1995, have you ever had any knowledge of China or any story or book about China in America?
Yes, I've read many books about China.
And after you came to China, do you have any? Do you think there is any difference between what you have already learned and what you have already seen here in China? Is there any difference?
Yes.
Is that a big difference?
Well, partly, you know, I read about China because when I came here, I came as a foreign scholar. I was an exchange scholar from my university to Sichuan Industry. So I was a scholar there. And so when I came, I thought I was going to write a book about education in China. Because I read, I thought, and then I will see. And the longer I was here, I thought, I can't write a book. There's so much to know. Maybe I will write just some scholarly monographs, a chapter for a book. And when I was here a little longer, I thought, well, maybe I will just write an article. And after about 1 month, I said there was no way I could.
Professional writer, and you have written so many stories. But to some of us, or especially to me, writing is a torture. So I want to know, where does your passion for writing come from?
Writing is torture for me also. I do not like writing. I like talking to people. But because of my profession, it has been important for me to write. A couple days before I left to come to here, I met with a group of teachers who are in a project to write. They are spending the summer writing. And they asked me to come and speak to them. And I couldn't finish my talk because partly I was talking about this week what I did. It was on Saturday, the Saturday after the earthquake. I said,